it's Chantel with Wildberry Quilting, and today we are sewing part one of the Bobbins and Blooms quilt. Now this came from our April Sew Sampler box, and I simply adore it. So let's get started. All right, so we are sewing Bobbin and Blooms. And we are starting by taking our C pieces and our M pieces, and we are going to snowball the top two corners. So just a little side note, if you do not use a piece of leader fabric on your projects, or rather I should say one of the benefits to using a little piece of leader fabric on your projects is what just happened to me. I was just about to get ready to start stitching these, and I put in my leader fabric and I realized I forgot to switch out the color of my thread. So I would have been stitching with a dark gray thread on this fabric. Can you imagine that? That would have stuck out like a sore thumb. It would not have been very nice. And I would have been doing some seam ripping for sure. Granted, I probably only would have started stitching on the first one before I realized it, but it still saved me some time and some hassle. So I definitely recommend those little scraps of leader fabric. And it just helps keep your fabric from getting sucked down into the machine too when you are starting up something at a corner or an edge. And it helps make sure that you don't end up with any kind of thread nesting on the bottom of your pieces that you are stitching together. All of that instead will be on the leader fabric. I didn't always used to use it, but I certainly do like using it now. And I know that, some people might argue that it is wasteful to use those little scraps of fabric in that way, but I only use pieces that are tiny scraps that are left over from other things. So like when I'm trimming up when I've done quilting on something and I'm going back through and I'm trimming off all around all of the edges, I save whatever bits are large enough that I feel like I can really use them. So I'll cut those into like 2.5-inch strips or 5-inch squares, whatever would be a normal size for a pre-cut. And then I'll go back through and anything that's smaller than that, I will cut up into leader fabric. And I just keep a stack of it here beside my machine. And I use the same piece over and over and over again before I end up moving on to another piece. So a stack like that will last me for a very long time. And I feel like it's a great use of fabric scraps that might otherwise be too small for other projects, or at least for other projects that I typically do. Let me see. Yeah, so this is one of my retired leader fabrics. You can see I've used it multiple times before I finally discarded it. So I'll pretty much just discard them as soon as they start getting a bit shaggy and there's all these thread bits hanging off of them, and it just becomes annoying to me to use them. That's when I'll discard them and move on to the next one. Oops. Oh, so two pieces together there. There we go. I've got to say, I love this pattern so much. I knew instantly as soon as I saw it in the box that I was going to have to make this one. It is so pretty. I wish it were a little bit bigger. It would be nice if it had been drafted to be a bit larger, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to order a little bit of extra fabric to use as borders so that I can increase it that way. And maybe we'll even do a video about how to increase the size of a quilt using borders. But I don't know, you guys let me know if you think that's something that sounds interesting or if you think it's too basic. I do, there's lots of different ways you can add borders. You could just do simple strips of fabric of, whatever your choice fabric is all around it. But you can also be much more complex with your borders as well, and it can really become a part of the design element. I've seen some lovely borders that really just make a quilt stand out. I know there's some people out there who don't like borders on a quilt. I think the majority of what they're talking about when they say that is just straight strips of fabric as opposed to a border that becomes part of the design element. And we could do either one on this quilt. If you guys have a preference, you let me know. But if no one has a preference, I will probably just do straight strips of fabric as the border, just to make it go really easy for myself. Where's the rest of my pieces? It took me a little bit of digging to find the rest of my end pieces. I don't know how I was overlooking them. They were in the box, but I keep all of my pieces for my quilts in a project box. I was trying to think of what I would call it, project box. And when I go through and I cut out a quilt, I just label them and mark it on my pattern that that piece has been cut, and then put them into my project box along with everything else that I need. Alright, so we've got this top portion sewn. I'm going to have to take this to the cutting mat and cut off this extra corners on both sides and then press them open. But before I do that, I'm going to split them into two piles. I've got two of each fabric over here and two of each of them over here. And we're going to make right and left facing flower petals. I've got my H pieces, and I am going to sew it going right across here on these ones, and then on these ones over here we are going to sew the diagonal facing the opposite direction. So let's do that, and then we will go over to the cutting mat. As I was saying, I just fell in love with this quilt though, and I am very excited to get to sew it. I think it's going to come out so beautiful. And it looks like one of my 3-inch squares I may have cut too close to the selvage, so I'm probably going to have to recut that one. And see, that would end up showing that's, if it were a 1/4 inch away, I could get away with it, but that's more than 1/4 inch. So I'm going to set this one off to the side, and hopefully I cut a few extra ones so that that's not a problem, but I'm not sure that I did. I kind of feel like I might have cut the exact right amount, so I might have to come back and stitch one more on my own just to cover that one that I cut too close to the edge. But if ever you do that where you cut too close to the selvage and you get a little bit of it on there, there's really two important things to note. One, is it going to be too large of an area showing to where it's going to show past your seam allowance? If it's going to show past, if it's more than 1/4 inch, it's going to show past your seam allowance, and you don't want that. Go back, recut the piece. You should also take into consideration if it is the thick edge of the selvage, because there's the edge that has writing on it, and then there's the edge that has print on it. And sometimes with some salvages, just some manufacturers, that salvage edge is a different thickness than the rest of the fabric, and you can generally feel a texture difference when you touch it. And if you caught any of that texture difference in your piece that you cut, go back and recut it. Do not sew in the texture difference. Even if it's caught in your seam allowance, do not do it, because it will end up with you having that texture difference causes a difference in the way that the quilt will wash and the shrinkage that will occur. And you might end up with a area of the quilt where you get puckering, because even though it's only in the seam allowance, it's enough to cause puckering in the seams, and it's just not worth it. Just take the time and go back and cut another one. You'll be grateful for it in the end when you have a beautifully finished quilt that doesn't have that issue. Hope I didn't sew 2 of them there. No, it's just 1. Almost sewed 2 there though. Okay. Yeah, it definitely looks like I cut the exact right amount. So that means I need to go back and recut that one. No big deal. I will take care of that, and then I will see you back here with a bunch of trimmed and pressed pieces. So now we are going to be taking the rest of our M pieces and our B pieces, and we are going to snowball the top 2 corners. And these will be the centers of our flowers. We'll go through and do that. I will say, when I opened up this box and I realized that it was, what is the name of this designer? When I realized who it was, what the line was, I was very tempted at first to put the fabric towards that, vintage stitching pattern that I bought from her. And, just put it towards that and then fill in the gaps of the rest of what I needed to buy to make that quilt. And then I saw this quilt pattern and I was like, oh, Okay, never mind. I'm gonna make this, and I'll just have to get the stuff for that quilt separately. I couldn't help it. It's so pretty. I've been subscribed to her website for a long time, and I'm pretty sure it's her that sends out a monthly, or she makes a monthly pattern for different little sewing spools. And she had one with like bunny rabbits and sewing spools and 4-leaf clovers and sewing spools and all different things like that. And it's just like a seasonal sewing spool pattern. And then at the end of the year, you put together a quilt from it. And I know one of them was like strawberry jam jars as sewing spools, and that one was so stinking cute. Oh my goodness. I had such a hard time not getting that. I was very, very tempted. I've been very, very tempted quite a few times, and to be honest, I might still at some point go back and purchase all of the patterns to make them into a quilt, because they really are so stinking cute. But when I saw this one, you know, basically, I think what has held me back is just the fact that they're sewing spools, and it's like, I don't know. Or maybe it's not so much that they're sewing spools, maybe it's just that I worry I'm not going to like every single one, and I don't want to commit to, I don't want to make a 12-month quilt that has 10 of the months, end up leaving out just a couple of them because I wasn't crazy about them or something. Which I guess that's kind of silly, because somebody in my family would probably love those 2 blocks or however many blocks it is that I wasn't over the moon about. So maybe it's a silly thing. I think also, though, it's the fact that they're sewing spools, and I kind of wonder, well, do I really need a quilt full of different sewing spools? Like, would I rather just have the item itself than a sewing spool? But I don't know. I do like sewing, so why wouldn't I like having the sewing spools? So now we have the left side petals and the center petals, and we are going to be stitching them together. So I recently found a floss tube channel that I have been enjoying watching. It's called Cross Stitching the Globe, I think. I think that's what the name of the channel is. If it's not, I will put a correction down below where I'm talking right now. But I will link them down below. They are 2 sisters, and they are so much fun to watch. They recently did a series on the most expensive cross-stitching stuff. And I think one of the videos was patterns, one of them was kits, there was books. I went through and did several videos on that. And they were just so much fun to watch. I was really surprised by some of the prices, though. I did not anticipate how high some of them would be. But I thought it was fantastic how respectful they were, too, so that they didn't hurt anybody's feelings. If there were people who were watching the videos and had purchased some of those items for those prices, they weren't judgy about it, and they weren't laughing at anybody over it, which I thought was really nice, because I mean, you never know why somebody decides to do something, and some people had sentimental reasons for purchasing them, and that's completely understandable. I mean, even if it wasn't a sentimental reason, I'm sure they were buying it because it made them happy. And at the end of the day, if you've got a little bit of extra to put towards something, it should be something that makes you happy. So I just thought it was nice that how they approached it, it wasn't like a gawking thing or anything along those lines. It kind of made me wonder if we have anything like that in the quilting world, though. Oops. All right. Okay, I thought I'd run out of thread for a second there. I'm not even sure what a quilting version of that would look like, honestly. Would it be where you have the most expensive quilting books? Or, because I can't imagine that there would be that many quilting patterns that would be super expensive. Because most quilting patterns are just different variations on other quilting patterns. I mean, we've got lots of different types of designs, but I don't know. A lot of them are based, at least in part, off of historical designs and mixed and mashed together with that. I mean, for example, these flowers that we're doing, we've just got, it's rectangles with snowballing at the top. And, there's half square triangles that are used for so much of what we do with quilting. So I'm not even sure that there would be a most expensive quilting pattern kind of thing. Who knows though? Maybe I should do a search and try to find out. That would be an interesting video, I think, if there actually were really expensive quilting patterns that existed. I mean, I guess there's a top of every market, right, for everything. I could certainly see some quilts themselves going for very high, but I think a large part of that is the historical value of them or the artistic value that's put into them. Or, a quilt done by a specific well-known quilter can sometimes fetch a very high amount. But I just can't think of that translating into patterns. Maybe I'm being naive though. I can certainly see how it would translate into books. And I know there have been some quilt books that I have seen other people reference, and I've thought they looked interesting, and I looked them up, and they were, over $100 for a quilt book. So I could definitely see it being applicable to in that regard. And that might be a fun series, fun video all on its own. I'm not sure that I could get a whole series out of that, but I could at least do a video just on the most expensive quilt books. Oh, or maybe like historical quilts themselves. I mean, we're just talking about that. That could be really interesting. So now we have our E pieces and our M pieces. And these are going to be our leaves, and we're going to snowball opposite corners. So one here and then one down here. So I finally ordered a new microphone. It is not here yet. It will hopefully be here tomorrow or maybe the next day. But I just had such a hard time with filming my last floss tube video that I was done. I was ready to get a new microphone. You may remember I've had a little bit of sporadic things here and there where the volume has kind of cut out for no apparent reason, or it's made like weird gargled noises and then come back. Well, this past, last night when I was trying to film floss tube, which will probably be out long before this, but it was, I tried to film it 3 times, twice earlier in the day. The first time I filmed it and I thought I had everything set up, and then I got all the way done with it and the lights on my microphone was off. And I was like, oh my goodness. I filmed all of that with no sound. Because when you plug in a microphone, it will completely take away any sound. The only sound that you will get is what comes through the microphone. So if it's plugged in but it's not turned on, no sound whatsoever. And I thought, well, maybe I just forgot to turn it on. And that really stinks. Let me make sure I've turned it on now. And I went through and I refilmed the entire thing. And when I got to the end, I looked down and the microphone was off. Now, it could be that maybe somebody came behind me and they unplugged it before it was done charging and it just didn't have a charge. Possibly. I did manage to film it. I charged it and then managed to film it again later on in the evening. But it's just that it wasn't the first time something like that has happened. So I just got tired of it and I was like, you know what? I'm just getting a new one. I've been doing this enough to where I've been consistent with it. I know that I'm going to continue doing YouTube videos. It makes sense just to invest in a little bit better microphone. I mean, the one that I currently have and am using was like $10. So really, it's a very inexpensive microphone. And that has lasted me for a whole year. So I can't complain too much. $10 for a whole year worth of videos. I think I've gotten my money out of the microphone. And I did still get another cheap microphone. This one was a $20 one. So I probably can't expect too much out of this one either. It did have a little bit better reviews than the one that I had originally. honestly, I just don't know what I'm looking for in a microphone. And other than the fact that it's got to be able to plug into my camera, I know I want a lavalier microphone, I think is what it's called, lavalier. And that's just the type of it. There's like a bullet microphone or a lavalier. And, you know, one will record like all of the sounds in the area, or you have to have it like really, really close to you or whatever. And then this one is more like a lapel microphone. So that's what I need, is something like that, so I can take it to the sewing machine or to the table for cutting or for unboxing something or whatever. I can't have one that I have to walk around and hold. That just wouldn't work for me. But again, I just don't really know what beyond that constitutes a good microphone. So I'm kind of at a loss, and it's like, well, I don't want to pay $200 for a microphone when I don't even know what I'm looking for and end up with something that I'm going to still end up having to replace in a year. That just doesn't make any sense. Whoops. There goes the thing that I dropped. Always have to drop something in some video. But, so, that was my big thing, was that I ordered a microphone. But I think it'll be good. I'm looking forward to trying out a new one, and I'm hoping that it'll work really well. Fingers crossed, right? I mean, as long as it does what it's supposed to do, that's the main thing. So now we are doing our little leaves, and we are going to be taking these pieces and attaching them to half of our leaves on this side. And if you can hear people talking in the background, that is my dad outside with the kids. They are riding their bikes in the driveway and having fun. You let me know, though, in the comments if you would like me to do a video like that with, you know, maybe the highest selling quilts or the most expensive quilt books, or if you have a different idea, that would also be appreciated. I would be happy to do a video like that if you guys were interested in it. I think that could be a lot of fun, and I think it would also be a lot of fun to do it with like the historical quilts, to include historical quilts in that, because I think that it might be interesting to learn about them, and there's probably a lot of history there that would be really intriguing, and I always enjoy learning more about all different things, but especially things that I do that I'm interested in. I think it's cool to know more about them and how these things came to be and stuff. I know I picked up a book at an antiques mall recently, and I was looking through that, and it had some quilts that were, they dated as far back as I think the 1700s, which is just amazing to think that something that's made out of fabric has lasted that many generations and is still here and surviving with us today. I think that's just really cool. I mean, think about that. That's That's really unique, and that's something that I like so much about crafts such as sewing and cross stitching as well, is that these are things that can last for centuries, potentially, if they are taken care of well. Now, that might not be as long as something like, I don't know, I was going to say a book, but honestly, it just depends on how well it's taken care of, too, because books typically sit up on a shelf and they're stored, hopefully, in a place where they are cared for, whereas quilts are loved and worn, wrapped around oneself and taken for picnics and put on people's beds and slept with every single night for, long periods of time, and washed. They're put through the ringer, literally. So the fact that that with everything that they go through, and that some of them have actually survived that long, I would argue makes them much more durable and much more longer lasting than books, despite the fact that we've got books that are older than we have quilts. But right now, with the advent of art quilts, where people make quilts just for display, who knows? That could very well change. All right, so now we have our spool bottoms, and we are going to be sewing these strips onto both sides. But as I was saying, I could see how with art quilts, the longevity of quilts could really increase. And, at some point in the future, 1,000 years from now, there might be Denise's art quilt still surviving and in remarkable condition somewhere on some palace wall or on display at some, major museum type thing, or who knows? Think of how cool that is. And that could honestly happen for anybody. Anyone's quilts could be that way. We think, oh, well, that would never happen with mine. Why? Why wouldn't it? Yes, maybe you give your quilts only to family members. And that is a beautiful, loving, wonderful thing. Maybe you only keep your quilts. But that doesn't mean that that will never happen, because we don't know what's going to happen to them when they are no longer in our possession. When these quilts are no longer ours, some of them, certainly, they might end up being donated to a charity shop or being used for something less than ideal. But they could also be the comfort that somebody needs. Or, as I said, they could end up being put on display 1,000 years from now and scrutinized over by scholars and debating about what time period it was from, which is a great reason to add dates and names to your quilts. It really is. I think eventually we're going to have a video We're just talking about the importance of adding some kind of label to your quilt, letting people know who made it and when. Because if you knew just the history of that, you would be amazed. I mean, we've got quilts that were donated during war times. I don't have these quilts. I'm not saying that. But just as society, we have these quilts that were donated during war times. And it was for different, you know, people not having things and rations and things of that nature. And these are considered extremely historically significant quilts. And they are put in museums. They are revered and admired and studied. And many of them, the whole reason why we know of this drive that was going on back during that time is because people actually put labels on their quilts, labeling them as wartime quilts. And I find that fascinating. And I know I'm not the only person who does. I know a lot of people find that really fascinating. And it's very heartwarming, too, to think of that, you know, in times of need, a lot of times it's us quilters and sewing people and who step forward and pick up the slack and fill the gaps of what is needed. And, you know, we've seen that recently back in 2020. Many people who were sewing, many people who are quilting set aside the things that they wanted to do for themselves and made hundreds and hundreds of masks. And regardless of what anybody's position is on masks, the fact is that back in 2020, it was something that everybody was looking for and everybody needed for various reasons. All right, so now we are taking our G strips and attaching them to the tops and bottoms of our spools or bobbins. Yeah, I guess all I'm saying is that, you know, regardless of your feelings on it, people who are sewing who took the time and spent their time and effort and stashes towards making masks for those people who wanted them, it was a very nice and selfless thing for them to do. So I guess that these are little bobbins that our flowers are growing out of, since it's called Bobbins and Blooms, and they definitely look more like bobbins than they are spools because they're short. But that also must mean that these are some very tiny flowers. Or maybe they're just very giant bobbins. I mean, certainly from our perspective, they look to be giant bobbins. It's a lot bigger than my bobbin. Could you imagine if that held regular thread though? It would take forever to run out. You would have bobbin thread forever. No more thread chicken. You just fill that up once. Oh my goodness. Could you imagine though how many spools of thread it would take to fill up one of these bobbins? you'd have to have some kind of special spool of thread that you used to fill your bobbins with. You couldn't just use a regular spool of thread. That thing would be massive. It would be like, what, 10,000 yards? Or I think it'd be 10,000 yards of thread to fill a bobbin this big. It'd probably be more than that, right? Like 20,000 or 30,000. Because that thing's huge. Like, if you took just a cone of thread, you would have 3 cones. And I don't know how much thread is on a cone. I think it's like, I want to say it's like 5,000 yards or something. Unless I'm completely off and they measure it in feet. I know some of the thread brands will say feet and some of them say yards. So maybe, I don't know. All I know is that would be a lot of thread. It would feel like the never-ending time of filling your bobbin. You know what? I think just from that perspective, it wouldn't be worth it. I would not want to spend that long filling up a bobbin. It would be nice to not have to ever run out, but it wouldn't be worth having to sit there for 4 hours with your foot on the pedal waiting for the bobbin to fill. Imagine how expensive that would be to fill up one of those bobbins too. Man. Yeah, I think that just wouldn't be worth it trying to fill up a bobbin that big. Not worth it. I'm sure though there are some factory bobbins though that were really big. Not factory like clothing sewing factory, but factory like the old textile factories. I bet you they had bobbins that were like that size. I know that I've got some old spools that are from like old textile companies, and those things are big, but they're not bobbin shaped. They're shaped completely different. And I'm not really sure what they were all used for, if they all just held regular thread, or if some of them held like yarn, or what. It'd be interesting to find out. We have an antique shop here that gets them in pretty often, and they usually sell them for like between $2 and $4, maybe $2 and $6, depending on who's selling them there. But they don't go for very much. If you guys are interested, I can pull one out and show it to you guys, because I've got 2 different types of ones. There's like these long spindly ones. They're like maybe 8 inches long. And then there's one that looks like a regular spool. And actually, if you guys have seen some of my older quilting videos, like putting on binding, I used to use it to hold my binding back before I had those awesome Lori Holt binding holders. And those things, let me tell you, are far superior to hold your binding on. They really are. Much easier to roll it up on there too. But I still keep that other one just because I think it's cool. It would make a good decoration if I had room in my sewing room for decorations, but I don't. Alright, so I thought I was recording and apparently I wasn't. I am just taking my leaf pieces and stitching these J strips to the tops and the bottoms. So I thought I'd hit record and I was just sitting there chatting away and stitching away and not recording anything whatsoever because I hadn't pushed the button. So, you know, I guess it's just one of those moments. I may not be blonde, but I can still have a blonde moment. I think we all can. We all have those airhead brain farts. That's what I usually call them, is brain farts. It's so uncouth, but it's funny. It makes me giggle. So just the idea of somebody's brain trying to work and think of something, and it's just like it's like a little poof. Yep, that's what happened. My brain went poof. Oh. Oh well. At least I realized it before I got too far. That's the important thing. It ended up being a good thing though, because I was super thirsty. So I went in there and I got myself a glass of sweet tea, some ice cold sweet tea filled all the way up with ice. Oh, it's so good. I love me some sweet tea. I guess that's the southern part of me, you know, love sweet tea. It's like you go somewhere up north and you ask them for tea, and they're like, sweet or unsweet? And you're like, what? Sweet, definitely. Or they're like, we only have unsweet tea, but I can give you these sugar packs. And you're like, okay, thank you. But that ain't sweet tea. Down south, you go to a restaurant and you ask for tea. And you don't even have to specify half the time for it to be sweet tea. They just know that's what it is. That's what tea is. It's ice cold sweet tea. That's just how it comes. You have to specify if you want it to be unsweet tea. And I will say some people go a little heavy on the sugar. I like mine to be, I think, somewhere in the moderate range. I don't want it to be, you know, I don't want it to be so sweet that looking at it gives me cavities. But I want it to be sweet enough to taste it. I don't want it to be like, I don't want there to ever be a question of, is this sweet tea or unsweet? If you have to ask, it's unsweet. It's got to be right there in that middle range. Like, for example, McDonald's sweet tea is not, ugh, it's way too sweet. I don't like that. That's like if you're in the same car with it, you're getting cavities. No, homemade sweet tea is always the best. Always, always the best. And I don't like prepackaged sweet tea, like the bottled sweet tea. Oh, no, 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 no. I would rather not have it. Like at all. I would just take water or almost anything else that's an option. I do not like bottled or canned tea. It's, ugh. Nope. My husband will drink that stuff, and I don't know how. Yuck. I won't name any brands because I don't want to get anybody mad at me, but yeah. I'm sure you know. I'm sure you've seen them in gas stations and stuff like that. You know exactly what I'm talking about. For me, it's homemade all the way. Or restaurants. Like some restaurants know how to make good sweet tea. But it's definitely something that comes down to location too, because you might go to one restaurant of a certain type and it's great, a certain chain, I mean, and it's fantastic. But then you go to another one, they just, somebody else is making the tea and it wasn't, they don't have the same experience. All right, so my leaves are all stitched together. I'm going to take these and go press them. And I think I'm going to call it there for today. And I will see you guys again for part 2 of this Sew With Me. This is from a Sew Sampler box. It was the Bobbins and Blooms quilt that we got for April, right? Yeah, April. And I am a Fat Quarter Shop affiliate. I will put my link down in the description box. They are the ones who sell the Sew Sampler boxes. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And I will see you guys again next time. Bye.